His overthinking is explained by this hidden psychology, the prison no one can see. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. You lie down at night, close your eyes, and your mind refuses to follow. It goes back to the conversation from 3 days ago. It fast-forwards to a scenario that hasn't happened yet. It replays a moment, then replays it again with a slightly different ending, then asks what the other ending would have meant, and then asks what that meaning says about you. By the time the alarm sounds, you have lived through 100 versions of a life you haven't yet lived, and you are already tired before the day has even begun. This is not thinking. This is something else entirely. This is a mind that has forgotten how to stop. A mind that was never really given permission to stop. A mind that somewhere along the way decided that stopping was dangerous. And that decision, made quietly and without announcement, has been running in the background of his life ever since, shaping the way he experiences time, relationships, decisions, and himself. Most people around him don't see it. He looks composed. He responds thoughtfully. He seems to have it together. He shows up, he contributes, he functions. But inside there is a storm that has been running for years, maybe decades, a relentless current of what ifs and why didn't I's and what does this means, and he is not controlling it. He is surviving it. Every single day, he is surviving it. And the loneliness of that is its own particular weight. Because how do you explain to someone that you are exhausted not from what you have done, but from what you have been thinking? How do you describe the experience of living inside a mind that will not give you a moment of genuine stillness? How do you ask for help with something that is invisible, that leaves no marks, that produces no evidence a person outside of you could point to? What you are about to hear is not a list of tips to quiet your mind. It is not a productivity hack or a mindfulness script. It is something rarer than that. It is an honest, unflinching look at what overthinking actually is, where it actually comes from, and what it has actually been trying to protect him from all along. Because the truth is, his mind is not broken. It is not weak. It is not the enemy. It is a system that learned a very specific lesson at a very specific time in his life, and it has been faithfully following that lesson ever since, even though he has long since outgrown the world that taught it to him. The system is not malfunctioning. The system is doing exactly what it was built to do, and understanding what it was built to do is the beginning of everything that follows. There is a reason why this is happening. There is a reason why the loop keeps running. There is a reason why logic alone has never been enough to make it stop. And that reason is not found in the thoughts themselves. It is found in what the thoughts are covering. It is found in the territory beneath the noise, the emotional landscape that the mental activity has been simultaneously expressing and concealing. What he is about to discover is not just an explanation for his overthinking. It is a doorway into understanding himself at a level that most people never reach. And that understanding, not the silence, not the stillness, not the absence of thought, but the understanding itself, is what will begin to set him free. Pay attention. Because what comes next was written for him. It was never about the thought. He has probably tried to fix it by thinking about it. That is the cruel irony of overthinking. The mind that cannot stop is the same mind being asked to solve its own excess. It is like trying to calm a flood by adding more water. It does not work. It has never worked, and yet he returns to it again and again because it is the only tool he knows. Because in the absence of another way, the familiar tool feels better than nothing, even when the familiar tool is part of the problem. But here is what the field of psychology has been quietly discovering for decades, what researchers and therapists and neuroscientists have been piecing together one study at a time. Overthinking is not primarily a cognitive problem. It is an emotional regulation problem wearing the costume of rational thought. The thoughts are not the source. They are the symptom. They are what happens when a person has emotions they do not know how to process, feelings that feel too large, too dangerous, or too shameful to simply be felt. The mind, in its loyalty and its terror, converts those feelings into thoughts, because thoughts feel safer. Thoughts can be analyzed, organized, debated, controlled, at least in theory. Feelings just exist. Feelings demand to be experienced. And for someone who was never taught that feelings are survivable, That demand feels unbearable. So the mind steps in. It offers a trade. Instead of feeling the fear, let us think about the fear. Instead of sitting with the grief, let us review every possible cause and consequence of the grief. Instead of tolerating the uncertainty, let us simulate every possible outcome until we find one that feels safe. It is a reasonable negotiation, from the mind's perspective. It is doing what it has always done, trying to help, trying to find a way through. The problem is that this trade never closes, because the feeling is still there, still waiting, still pressing against the walls of his chest, still asking to be acknowledged, and the mind keeps running, keeps generating more thoughts, keeps building more elaborate mental structures, all in a desperate attempt to contain something that was never meant to be contained. The emotion does not dissolve because it has been analyzed. It simply waits, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years. Most people don't realize this. They believe their overthinking is about the specific thing they are overthinking about. The relationship, the decision, the mistake, the silence, the look on someone's face. They believe that if they could just resolve that one thing, the loop would stop. But the loop does not stop, because the loop was never really about that thing. It was about the emotion underneath it, the unmet need, the old wound, the feeling that was never allowed to land. This is the first and most important truth he needs to hear. His overthinking is not a thinking problem. It is a feeling problem. And the path out does not run through more analysis. It runs through the thing his mind has been running from all along. The path requires going toward the discomfort, rather than around it. Not all at once, not recklessly, but gradually, with the kind of self-compassion that makes the approach feel survivable. The next question, then, is not how to think less. It is when did he learn that feeling was not safe? And the answer to that question reaches much further back than he might expect. The day the mind learned to fear silence. He did not become an overthinker as an adult. The adult version of him, the one who lies awake rehearsing conversations and catastrophizing outcomes, that version was built by a child who had no other choice. The adult is living out what the child learned, and before he can change the pattern, he needs to understand who taught it to him and why. Think about what a child needs to feel safe in the world. It is not complicated. A child needs consistency. A child needs to be able to look at the people around him and know, with some degree of certainty, what is coming next. Not perfection, not abundance, just predictability. The sense that the environment can be read, that emotional signals are reliable, that safety does not disappear without warning. When that predictability is missing, the child does not have the luxury of simply being present. The child begins to monitor. He scans the room for shifts in tone, changes in expression, signs of tension. He starts reading the air before he even knows that is what he is doing. He becomes exquisitely sensitive to subtle changes in the emotional weather of the people around him, because his felt sense of security depends on his ability to read those changes correctly. He learns to detect a mood shift in the quality of a silence. He learns to feel the difference between the kind of quiet that is safe and the kind that is not. This hypervigilance is not dysfunction. In that environment, it was intelligence. It was adaptation. It was the child's nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems are designed to do: detect threat and respond accordingly. In a world where a parent's mood was volatile, or where love felt conditional, or where silence meant danger rather than peace, staying mentally alert was not optional. It was survival. And a child who survives through intelligence learns to trust that intelligence above everything else. The tragedy is that survival strategies do not automatically deactivate when the original threat is gone. The child grows up. The environment changes. The people who created the uncertainty are no longer in the room. He has his own space now, his own choices, his own life. But the monitoring continues. The scanning continues. The mental rehearsal continues. Because the nervous system was wired during those formative years to believe that staying alert is the price of staying safe. So the adult who cannot stop thinking is, in many cases, still that child standing in a room, reading the emotional temperature, trying to predict what will happen next so that he can be ready when it does. He is not overthinking because he is weak or neurotic or broken. He is overthinking because he was taught, at a cellular level, that the mind is the only reliable protection he has. And you do not simply unlearn a protection strategy. You understand it first. You honor what it accomplished. And then, carefully, you begin to teach the system that it no longer needs to work so hard. The silence that other people find restful, he finds threatening. Because for him, silence was never neutral. Silence was the pause before something changed. Silence was what preceded the shift in the room, the held breath before impact, and his mind, loyal and relentless, still refuses to let silence be just silence. Understanding this does not erase the pattern, but it does something more important. It removes the shame. Because a child who learned to survive in a storm cannot be blamed for still checking the sky, even when the weather has cleared. And the weather has cleared. Something in him already knows that, which is why he is here listening, which is why something in him is finally ready to look at what was built inside him, and to ask, for the first time, whether he still needs to carry it. Anxious attachment and the obsessive mind. There is a specific kind of overthinking that lives inside relationships. It is not the same as worrying about a career decision or a financial choice. It is sharper, more personal, more destabilizing. It arrives without invitation and takes over entirely. It takes the form of reading a message 17 times looking for hidden meaning. It is the panic that arrives when someone takes longer than usual to respond. It is the mental spiral that begins the moment a conversation ends on an ambiguous note and does not stop until some form of reassurance arrives. And sometimes even the reassurance is not enough because the mind immediately begins to question whether the reassurance was genuine. This is not irrationality. This is anxious attachment in action, and it is one of the most misunderstood psychological patterns in human experience. Attachment theory tells us that the way we learn to connect with our earliest caregivers becomes the template through which we understand all future relationships. When that early connection is inconsistent, when love is sometimes present and sometimes absent, when closeness is followed by distance without explanation, the child develops what researchers call an anxious attachment style. He learns that connection is unstable, that love can disappear, that he must work to maintain it, watch for signs of its withdrawal, and be ready to respond the moment it seems to be slipping away. He becomes, in a sense, a specialist in the management of emotional uncertainty within relationships. This style does not disappear in adulthood. It relocates. It transfers onto romantic partners, friends, colleagues, anyone whose opinion or presence feels significant. And in the context of those relationships, the overthinking mind becomes a surveillance system. Every shift in behavior is analyzed. Every delay is interpreted. Every word that was not said receives more attention than the words that were. The spaces between communication become as loud as the communication itself. The truth is that the anxious mind is not being irrational. It is being loyal. Loyal to the original lesson. Loyal to the memory of a time when paying close attention to another person's emotional state was the only way to feel connected to them. The mind learned that closeness must be earned, maintained, and protected through constant vigilance. And so it watches. It calculates. It prepares for loss, even when loss is nowhere near. What makes this particularly painful is the way it distorts perception. A partner who is simply tired becomes a partner who is pulling away. A friend who takes a day to respond becomes a friend who is losing interest. An ordinary moment of distance becomes evidence of something larger, something threatening, something that confirms the old fear, that he is too much or not enough, or fundamentally difficult to stay with. The perception is not fabricated. It is constructed from real emotional material. But the construction is happening through a lens that was ground by old pain, not by present reality. Most people don't realize that what they experience as anxiety about the relationship is actually a grief echo from a much older time. The relationship in front of them is simply triggering the wound from behind them. The mind runs its loops, not because the current person is dangerous, but because the original attachment felt fragile in a way that left a mark. A mark that, until it is named and understood, continues to speak louder than everything the present moment is trying to say. The healing here is not about thinking more clearly about the relationship. It is about recognizing that the alarm going off inside him is connected to a fire that happened a long time ago. The building is not burning now. The alarm simply does not know that yet. And teaching the alarm the difference between then and now is the quiet, patient, essential work that no amount of reassurance seeking will ever replace. Control is just fear in a suit. Ask him why he overthinks and he will likely say something like, "I just want to be prepared. I just want to make sure I don't make a mistake. I just want to understand the situation before I respond. I just want to be ready." These answers sound reasonable. They sound like the language of a careful, thoughtful person, and they are. But they are also something else. They are the language of a mind that believes, at a very deep level, that preparation can prevent pain. This belief is the foundation of the overthinking habit. The idea that if he thinks long enough, hard enough, and thoroughly enough, he will eventually arrive at a version of the future that is safe. A version where no one leaves, where no one is disappointed, where nothing goes wrong, where he has anticipated every outcome and prepared the appropriate response. A version where the uncertainty that terrifies him has been thought away. The problem is that this version does not exist. It cannot exist. Not because the world is cruel, but because uncertainty is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition of being alive. And the mind that is trying to eliminate uncertainty through analysis is engaged in a task that is, by definition, impossible. No amount of preparation has ever produced certainty. It has only ever produced the feeling of preparation, which is temporary, and the exhaustion of the effort, which accumulates. But the mind does not know this. Or rather, it knows it intellectually, but it does not believe it emotionally. Because emotionally, the feeling of thinking through a scenario provides genuine temporary relief. The mental simulation of an outcome reduces the felt sense of threat just enough to keep the behavior going. It is the psychological equivalent of checking a locked door. The first check feels reassuring, so the mind checks again and again and again. Because the feeling of safety it produces is real, but it never lasts. And the moment it fades, the mind goes back to the door. This is not weakness. This is how the human brain responds to perceived threat. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, does not distinguish between imagined danger and real danger. It responds to both with the same urgency, and so the mind, trying to neutralize that urgency, runs its simulations, reviews its options, and generates its plans, not because it is irrational, but because it is doing precisely what the brain has evolved to do: respond to the alarm. The problem is not the checking. The problem is the belief that drives the checking, the belief that certainty, once achieved, will bring peace. It never does, because the peace he is looking for is not on the other side of a perfectly analyzed scenario. It is not waiting at the end of a perfectly crafted response or a perfectly timed decision. The peace he is looking for is on the other side of the realization that he can survive the uncertainty, that outcomes he cannot control do not determine his worth, that being prepared has never been the same as being safe, and that being safe has never required the level of mental effort he has been expending. Control is not calm. Control is fear that has learned to wear professional clothing. It shows up as planning, as analysis, as contingency thinking, as reasonable precaution. But underneath the suit, it is still fear. Still the old belief that vigilance is the price of survival. And the exhaustion he feels is not just the exhaustion of thinking too much. It is the exhaustion of a man who has been working a job that was never his to do. The nervous system that never got the memo. Everything that has been described so far lives not only in the mind but in the body. And this is the part of the conversation that most people never have. Because when someone says they cannot stop overthinking, the conversation immediately moves to thoughts, to patterns, to beliefs, to strategies. Very rarely does anyone ask, what is happening in his body while all of this is occurring? And yet the body is where everything begins. The answer is significant, because in a person with a history of chronic stress, emotional unpredictability, or early experiences of fear and instability, the nervous system does not simply return to a resting state after the threat has passed. It recalibrates around a new baseline, a baseline that is elevated, a baseline that treats uncertainty not as a neutral condition, but as a low-grade emergency. The system learns to stay ready, and readiness, when it becomes permanent, is indistinguishable from anxiety. The autonomic nervous system operates in two primary modes. The first is the parasympathetic mode, often described as rest and digest, a state of calm, openness, and ease in which the body feels safe and the mind can think clearly, connect genuinely, and rest fully. The second is the sympathetic mode, the fight-or-flight response, a state of alert and mobilization in which the body is preparing to respond to danger. In this state, the heart rate increases, the breath shallows, digestion slows, and the mind narrows its focus to anything that might represent a threat. For a person who has spent significant time in high-stress environments, the nervous system learns to default to sympathetic activation, not because there is an immediate danger, but because the system has been trained to stay ready. It is like a car alarm that has been set so sensitively that it goes off in the wind. The alarm was designed to detect real threats, but after enough false positives, it starts going off for everything. A change in tone, a moment of quiet, an unanswered message, a look that lasted a second too long. This is the physiological reality of chronic overthinking. The mind is not running loops because it wants to. It is running loops because the body is telling it that there is something to be afraid of, that now is not the time to relax, that staying alert is still necessary, and the mind, obedient and concerned, generates thoughts in response to that signal. Thoughts that scan for danger, thoughts that analyze and anticipate, thoughts that do their best to make sense of a felt sense of threat that has no visible origin. Most people don't realize that they cannot think their way out of a nervous system state. Insight alone, as valuable as it is, does not calm a dysregulated body. The body needs something different. It needs signals of safety that it can feel, not just understand. Slow breath that reaches the belly. Physical movement that releases stored tension. Warmth. Touch. Stillness that is chosen rather than forced. These are not soft suggestions. They are physiological interventions. They are how the system that has been running on high alert begins gradually to learn that the emergency is past. He is not someone who thinks too much. He is someone whose body has been living in a state of readiness for so long that his mind has simply been responding accordingly. The body speaks first. The mind only follows. And if he wants the mind to follow somewhere different, he must first give the body a reason to lead there. The voice that sounds like reason. There is a voice inside the overthinking mind that presents itself as logic. It asks questions that seem fair. It raises concerns that seem legitimate. It says things like, "Are you sure you handled that correctly? Do you think they are upset with you? What if you made the wrong choice? What does it say about you that you reacted that way?" It sounds like critical thinking. It sounds like self-reflection. It sounds at times like the most reasonable voice in the room. But it is not. It is the inner critic, and it has been hiding inside his analytical mind for so long that he has forgotten it is there at all. It has become so familiar that it no longer announces itself. It simply begins to speak and he begins to listen, assuming, as he always has, that what sounds logical must be true. The inner critic is not born with us. It is built from the accumulated voices of people who could not see us clearly. Parents who were critical because they were in pain. Teachers who were harsh because they were afraid. Peers who mocked because they were threatened. Environments that communicated, in 100 subtle ways, that he was not quite right as he was. And over time, those external voices become internal ones. They get absorbed into the structure of the mind and begin to operate from the inside, using the same language, the same tone, the same standards. But now, without any external source to question or resist. The cruelty of this process is how convincing it feels, because the inner critic does not present itself as cruelty. It presents itself as helpfulness. It tells him it is only trying to keep him from making mistakes. It says it is holding him to a high standard because it believes in him. It frames its relentless questioning as due diligence, as conscientiousness, as the reasonable caution of a thoughtful person. It sounds almost always like it is on his side, but look at what it actually does. It rehearses failure. It collects evidence of inadequacy. It returns to old mistakes not to learn from them but to confirm something, that he is the kind of person who makes mistakes like that. It applies a standard of perfection to his behavior that it would never apply to anyone else, and then uses every gap between the ideal and the real as proof of something fundamentally wrong with him. It is not helping him grow. It is keeping him small, and it has been doing so for long enough that he may have come to experience its presence as simply the way things are. This is not reason. This is shame wearing the mask of reason, and the loops it generates are not searches for truth. They are prosecutions. He is not thinking in order to understand. He is thinking in order to convict himself of something he was told he was a long time ago. The first step out of this particular trap is not to argue with the voice. Arguing with the inner critic gives it more energy, more presence, more authority. The first step is simply to recognize it for what it is. To notice when the mental spiral begins that this is not objective analysis. This is an old voice speaking from an old wound. A voice that was never his to begin with. And voices that were never ours do not get to have the final word. He does not have to believe everything he thinks, especially the thoughts that sound the most certain. What he is really afraid of feeling. Here is a question worth sitting with. In all the hours he has spent overthinking, how much time has he spent actually feeling? Not analyzing feelings, not thinking about feelings, not describing feelings in his head as a way of processing them at a safe distance, feeling them, letting them move through his body without immediately reaching for a thought to explain or contain them. For most overthinkers, the answer is very little, because one of the least discussed but most powerful engines of the overthinking loop is emotional suppression. The act, often unconscious, of pushing a feeling down before it has a chance to fully arrive, before it can be seen, before it can demand anything, before it becomes real in the way that fully felt emotions become real. Here is how it works. Something happens that produces an emotional response. It might be grief or fear or longing or humiliation, or love that feels too exposed, or anger that feels too dangerous, or a tenderness so unfamiliar it feels threatening. The feeling begins to rise. It gathers in the chest, or the throat, or somewhere behind the eyes. And before it can fully surface, the mind intervenes. It offers a diversion. It begins to think about the situation instead of feeling it. It generates a question, an analysis, a concern, a plan. Anything to redirect attention away from the raw experience of the emotion. This is not always a conscious choice. In many cases, it is a reflex that was developed early, in environments where emotions were either punished, ignored, or responded to with such anxiety by others that the child learned to manage them internally before they became visible. He learned to swallow the feeling. He learned to be composed when he was not. He learned that showing what he felt created problems and that keeping it inside, however uncomfortable, was the safer option. And the mind learned to help him do it by becoming very, very busy. The feelings that are swallowed do not disappear. They circulate. They convert. They become the restless energy behind the mental loops. They become the vague unease that he cannot name but cannot escape. They become the emotional static that runs beneath every ordinary moment of his day, looking for a way out that the mind keeps blocking. What he is afraid of feeling is usually not as unbearable as the mind has suggested. Grief, when it is actually allowed to arrive, is not a collapse. It is a release. It moves. It changes shape. It eventually, in its own time, passes through. Fear, when it is felt rather than managed, tends to pass through the body in waves rather than setting up permanent residence. Even the feelings that seem most dangerous, the ones the mind has been most vigilant about keeping down, tend to be survivable in ways that the avoidant mind cannot predict from a safe distance. The irony is that the very act of trying not to feel is what keeps the feelings in circulation. The loop that he is trying to escape through thinking is being maintained by the emotions he is trying not to feel. And the actual exit, is not through more thought. It is through the feeling he has been running from. It is through the willingness to stop and say, I am going to let this land now. I am going to feel this, whatever it is, and I am going to trust that I can survive it. The perfectionism underneath the paralysis. He has probably stood at the edge of a decision and felt nothing but fog. He has probably scrolled back through a conversation looking for the right thing to say, only to feel less certain the longer he looked. He has probably started and deleted more messages than he has sent, rehearsed more conversations than he has had, and spent more time preparing for life than actually living it. He has probably looked at someone else making a decision quickly, without apparent anguish, and wondered what they know that he does not. This is perfectionism. Not the kind that polishes work until it shines. The kind that cannot begin because the beginning might be wrong. The kind that mistakes inaction for safety. The kind that has convinced him, quietly and efficiently, that the cost of an imperfect move is greater than the cost of no move at all. And in that calculation, life keeps moving while he waits for conditions that never fully arrive. Perfectionism and overthinking are not different problems. They are the same fear wearing different faces. The fear that his choices will reveal something about him, that the wrong decision will not just produce a bad outcome, but will prove something, confirm something, expose something that he has been hoping no one, including himself, will notice. There is a reason why perfectionism is so often rooted in childhood environments where performance was the primary currency of love, where approval was conditional, where making a mistake meant disappointment, not just in the outcome, but in him as a person, where the gap between what was expected and what was delivered was met not with curiosity or support, but with judgment. When a child grows up in that kind of environment, he learns that being wrong is not just inconvenient. It is dangerous. It threatens the connection he needs to survive. The adult who cannot make a decision is often that same child, still calculating the relational cost of every choice before he will allow himself to make it. Still measuring the distance between what he might do and what he believes he should do. Still afraid that the wrong answer will cost him something he cannot afford to lose. He is not indecisive because he is weak. He is indecisive because he was taught that the wrong choice has consequences that go far beyond the practical. And the tragic brilliance of this pattern is that the more he delays, the more the decision accumulates weight. Every hour of analysis adds another layer of significance to the choice, until what began as a simple decision has become a referendum on his worth, his judgment, his right to trust himself. The stakes feel impossibly high not because the decision is important, but because he has been loading it with meaning it was never supposed to carry. The release from perfectionism is not the discovery of the perfect choice. It is the realization that there is no such thing. That most decisions made from a place of genuine self-knowledge can be adjusted, corrected, or learned from. That the cost of an imperfect move is almost never what the perfectionist mind predicts. And that the life that is waiting for him on the other side of the decision is far richer than the one he is living inside the deliberation. How wounds rewrite reality. He knows rationally that the person in front of him is not the person who hurt him before. He knows that the silence in today's relationship is probably just silence, that the slight shift in tone is probably nothing, that the unanswered question is more likely a busy afternoon than evidence of withdrawal. He knows this. He has said it to himself many times in many versions. And yet he does not feel it. The alarm is going off regardless, insisting that this time is like last time, that the pattern is familiar, that he has been here before and he knows how this ends. This is not failure of logic. This is the way trauma works on perception. Past wounds do not simply leave memories. They leave interpretive filters, lenses through which present experience is automatically processed, often before conscious awareness has a chance to intervene. And those filters are not updated by intellectual understanding alone. They are updated by felt experience over time, which is a much slower and more demanding process than simply deciding to see things differently. When someone has experienced significant relational pain, whether abandonment, betrayal, emotional inconsistency, or repeated disappointment, the brain does something adaptive and ultimately problematic. It creates a threat template, a pattern of signals associated with that pain, so that future experiences can be screened against it before they become dangerous. The brain is trying to protect him. It is saying, last time this happened, it ended badly. So this time, let us catch it early. Let us not be caught off guard. Let us be ready. The problem is that the template is imprecise. It was built from specific experiences, but it gets applied broadly. A partner who goes quiet for an afternoon matches the template of a parent who withdrew affection without explanation. A friend who cancels plans matches the template of someone who eventually disappeared. The emotional response that follows is genuine. The alarm is real. The anxiety in the chest is real, but it is responding to a pattern, not to the actual person or situation in front of him. It is reading the present through the grammar of the past. Most people don't realize how thoroughly their past has edited their present. They believe they are responding to what is happening now, but they are often responding to what happened then through the lens of what they have learned to expect. His overthinking in relationships is not irrationality. It is pattern recognition operating on outdated data. It is an intelligent system doing an honest job with incomplete information. The question that matters is not whether the pattern is real. It is whether the pattern is current, whether the person standing in front of him deserves to be seen through the wound from behind him, whether he is willing, gradually and with great care, to allow his present experience to begin updating the template. Not by ignoring the past, not by pretending the wound is not there, but by staying present long enough, with enough safety and enough awareness, for the present to begin to speak for itself. And for the old story to loosen its grip, just slightly, one experience at a time. The belief buried beneath every loop. Beneath the analysis, beneath the rehearsal, beneath the scanning and the planning and the endless what-ifs, there is something quieter and far more significant. A belief so fundamental, so thoroughly embedded in the structure of his self-perception, that he rarely examines it directly. He mostly just lives inside it. He moves through his days shaped by it without ever quite naming it. And yet, it organizes nearly everything. The belief is this: that he is not enough. Not enough to be chosen without effort. Not enough to be loved without performing. Not enough to trust that his natural presence, without apology or optimization, is sufficient. Not enough to simply exist and have that existence be welcome. And so the mind compensates. It works over time. It prepares, overanalyzes, rehearses, and perfects, because somewhere in the architecture of his sense of self, there is a conviction that who he simply is will not be enough, and that if he stops working so hard, the gap will become visible to everyone around him. This belief is rarely explicit. He is unlikely to say, aloud or even to himself, "I do not believe I am enough." What he experiences instead is the behavior that flows from the belief, the compulsive need to get things right, the difficulty accepting criticism without spiraling into self-doubt, the feeling that his worth is conditional on his performance, on being helpful, on being needed, on not being too much or too little or too anything, the sense that love must be earned through constant maintenance, that presence alone is not a gift, but merely a starting point from which he must continually justify his place. The origin of this belief is almost always relational. It is built in environments where worth was not simply given, where a child's inherent value was not reflected back to them clearly and consistently, where love came with conditions, even subtle ones, where approval required achievement and disapproval arrived without warning. The child in that environment does not conclude that the environment was flawed. Children rarely do. Children are not equipped to evaluate the systems they are born into. Instead, they conclude something about themselves, that they must not be quite right, that they need to try harder, that who they are at rest is somehow insufficient. And that child grows into an adult who thinks too much, because thinking feels like doing something, and doing something feels like staying worthy. The loops are not random. They are, in a painful and deeply human way, an act of devotion to a standard of self that was imposed from the outside and has never been questioned from the inside. The most radical thing he could do for his overthinking is not to develop a new mental strategy. It is to sit with the possibility that he does not need to earn his place in the world, that his worth is not a project, that the exhausting mental labor he has been performing for years is not the price of belonging. It is the evidence of a wound, and wounds, when they are seen clearly and held with compassion, can begin to heal. Not all at once, not without difficulty, but genuinely and permanently. When the mind carries what the soul should hold, there is a weight that no amount of thinking can lift. He has probably felt it. The sense that he is carrying something too large for any one mind to manage. That the mental effort required to navigate his own inner world is exceeding his capacity. That no matter how much he processes, reflects, or analyzes, the feeling of being overwhelmed does not substantially reduce. He thinks more, understands more, and still feels the weight. This is not a sign of inadequacy. It is a sign that he has been trying to carry something with the wrong part of himself. The mind is a remarkable instrument, but it was not designed to be the sole container of a human life. It was not designed to hold grief, to absorb fear, to sustain hope, to navigate loss, or to find meaning in suffering. These are functions that belong to something broader than cognition, something that different traditions have named differently but have consistently recognized: the deeper self, the soul, the essence beneath thought, the part of a person that exists prior to any analysis of it. Call it what resonates. The name matters less than the recognition. When a man has lost access to that part of himself, when spiritual disconnection of any kind, religious, existential, or simply the disconnection from meaning, purpose, or a sense of being held by something larger than his own experience, has left him feeling alone in what he carries. The mind fills the vacuum. It takes on more than its share. It becomes not just the thinking center, but the emotional center, the meaning-making center, the place where he goes to feel less alone in his confusion. And it is not equipped for any of those roles. It was never built for them. The result is what he knows well: a mind that cannot rest, that runs even when it is exhausted. That keeps generating questions because questions feel like contact with something larger than the ordinary. What am I supposed to do with this? Why is this happening to me? What does any of this mean? These are not cognitive questions. They are spiritual ones. They are the questions of a person reaching for something that thinking alone cannot provide. And the thinking mind, which deals in analysis and logic and language, is not the part of him that can answer them. What begins to shift when a person reconnects with something beyond their own thoughts is subtle but significant. There is a loosening of the grip, a quiet sense that not everything depends on him figuring it out, that there is an intelligence in his life that is not located entirely inside his skull, that he is held by something he does not have to mentally manage, something that does not require his constant attention in order to remain present, that he can, perhaps, set down a portion of what he has been carrying and find that it does not fall. This is not a religious argument. It is a psychological one. A human being who trusts only his own analysis is a human being who has placed the full weight of his existence on a single instrument. And that instrument, however powerful, was never built to carry that alone. The exhaustion he feels is not a character flaw. It is physics. Something has been asked to bear more than it was made to bear. And the relief that becomes available when that weight is redistributed is not the relief of giving up. It is the relief of finally being honest about what was never his to carry alone. The body already knows the answer. He has been searching for the answer in the right place, but with the wrong tool. He has been looking with his mind for something that his body has been trying to show him all along. And the distance between those two things, between the answer the mind seeks and the knowing the body already holds, is not a distance of miles, but of attention. There is a form of intelligence that lives below the neck. Psychologists call it somatic awareness. Spiritual traditions simply call it presence, and it is in many ways the antidote to the kind of overthinking that has been described throughout this conversation. Not because it eliminates thought, but because it offers an access point to truth that thought cannot reach on its own. A truth that is not constructed through analysis, but simply noticed, the way you notice warmth or weight or the feeling of a breath arriving exactly when it needs to. Here is what most overthinkers experience in their bodies. Tightness in the chest that appears before the source of anxiety has even been named. Shallow breath that keeps the nervous system just slightly elevated, just slightly ready. A jaw that is almost always slightly clenched, holding something it cannot quite release. Shoulders that carry invisible weight, a stomach that contracts before the mind has registered why. These are not incidental physical sensations. They are information. Precise, honest, immediate information about what is actually happening inside him, beneath the layer of narrative. The body does not lie the way the mind can. The mind can rationalize, minimize, and reframe. It can tell him that he is fine when he is not, that he is overreacting when he is not, that what he is feeling is not that significant when it clearly is. The body cannot do any of that. The body simply registers what is true. It speaks in sensation rather than language, and when he learns to listen to it, when he slows down enough to feel what is actually happening in his physical experience, rather than what he thinks is happening, he gains access to a level of self-knowledge that no amount of analysis can replicate. This is not mystical, it is neurological. The vagus nerve, the longest nerve in the body, connects the brain to almost every major organ system. It carries information in both directions, but the vast majority of its signals travel upward, from body to brain, not the other way around. This means that the body is constantly sending the brain information about the state of the organism, and the brain is reading and responding to that information, whether or not the conscious mind is aware of it. When the body is tense, the brain interprets the environment as threatening. When the body softens, the brain receives a different signal entirely. When he places his attention in his body, when he notices the sensation of breath without immediately narrating it, when he feels the weight of his hands or the contact of his feet with the floor, he is not disengaging from intelligence. He is accessing a deeper layer of it. He is giving his nervous system the signal that the moment is worth inhabiting, that it is safe enough to be here now, without planning the next moment in advance. That presence is not a risk but a relief. The answer he has been looking for is not at the end of the next thought. It is in the breath he is taking right now. It has been there, patient and available, every time the mind raced past it looking for something more complicated. Seeing without judging. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes not from the overthinking itself, but from the relationship he has developed with the overthinking. The judgment, the shame, the frustrated self-examination that sounds like, why can I not just stop? Why am I like this? What is wrong with me? Why does everyone else seem to manage what I cannot? That layer of reaction on top of the original experience is often more painful than the loop itself, and unlike the loop, which at least began as an attempt to help, this second layer offers nothing at all. It is pure cost with no purpose. Here is a paradox that he may not have encountered before. The more he fights the overthinking, the stronger it becomes. The more he labels it as wrong, as a problem, as evidence of something broken in him, the more energy he gives it. Because the mind that is trying to stop overthinking is still overthinking. It has simply found a new topic, itself. The war against the pattern becomes part of the pattern. This is where conscious awareness becomes something more than just another form of mental activity. When a person can observe their own mental processes without immediately moving to correct or condemn them, something genuinely different begins to happen. The observation itself creates distance. Not the cold distance of detachment, but the spacious distance of compassion. The sense that he is not his thoughts, that he is the awareness in which the thoughts arise, and that the awareness itself, the witnessing presence beneath all the noise, is always, already, still. This is not an abstract philosophical concept. It is a practical shift in attention. It is the difference between being inside the storm and watching the storm from a window. The storm is still real. The thoughts are still present. The anxiety is still there. But there is now a perspective from which they can be witnessed without being completely consumed by them. A perspective that is not afraid of what it sees. What makes this shift possible is not discipline or willpower. It is self-compassion. It is the willingness to say, I see that this is happening in me right now, and I am not going to make it worse by hating myself for it. It is looking at the loop with the same quiet, non-reactive attention that a caring parent would bring to a frightened child. Not solving, not fixing, not demanding that the child simply calm down because calm would be more convenient. Just seeing, just acknowledging, just being present with what is, without requiring it to be something else before it deserves attention. This kind of seeing does not resolve everything, but it interrupts the automatic. It creates a pause between the trigger and the spiral, and in that pause, something new becomes possible. Not control, not the enforced silence he has been chasing, but something rarer, genuine choice, the freedom to respond rather than react, to be present rather than consumed. And that freedom, however small it may seem at first, is the beginning of a completely different relationship with his own mind. The moment he stops fighting himself. Every strategy described in this conversation, every insight, every reframe, every psychological truth and somatic practice and spiritual invitation eventually leads to the same threshold. A moment that cannot be planned or prepared for. A moment that feels, when it arrives, like both a defeat and a liberation. A moment that the overthinking mind, with all its preparation and rehearsal, cannot manufacture or accelerate. It simply arrives when enough has been understood and enough has been felt. It is the moment he stops fighting himself, not the moment he figures everything out, not the moment the overthinking stops completely, not the moment he achieves some pristine, anxiety-free state of mental clarity that he can sustain indefinitely. Those moments may come, in time, and partially, but the real shift, the one that changes the quality of his inner life at a fundamental level, is the moment he stops treating his own mind as the enemy. The moment the war inside him, quiet as it has always been, finally ends. For years, maybe decades, he has been in a war with himself. On one side, the part of him that worries, that loops, that catastrophizes, that cannot let go, that keeps checking even when checking has never brought lasting relief. On the other, the part that is exhausted by all of it, that desperately wants peace, that has tried every strategy and found none of them sufficient. These two parts have been pulling against each other, spending enormous energy in conflict and arriving nowhere. The exhaustion of that war is real. The cost of it is real. What changes when the war ends is not that one side wins. It is that both sides are finally allowed to be heard. The part that worries is not defeated. It is listened to. It is asked, "What are you trying to protect me from? What do you need me to know? What are you afraid will happen if you stop?" And when that part is genuinely heard, not dismissed, not silenced, not shamed into submission, but actually listened to with patience and care, something happens that no analytical strategy has ever been able to produce. It relaxes. Gradually, imperfectly, and with occasional returns to the old urgency. But it relaxes. The overthinker who has been at war with his own mind has been doing something profoundly courageous and profoundly costly. He has been trying to control the uncontrollable from the inside. He has been working to manage his own psychology with the very instrument that is struggling. And the exhaustion of that effort is not a sign of weakness. It is the predictable result of an impossible task pursued with extraordinary dedication. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is the recognition that the fight was never the path, that the peace he has been searching for was never located at the end of a perfectly resolved thought, that it was always waiting on the other side of the simplest, most difficult act available to him, allowing himself to be exactly as he is, exactly where he is, without requiring that to be different before he can rest. This is not the end. It is the beginning of something that has no name yet. Something that grows quietly, in the space left behind by the war. It starts here, in the decision to stop fighting, in the courage, because it is courage, to lay down arms against himself, and finally, fully, come home. The messenger has been heard. Finally. That word carries weight here, because what follows is not a summary. It is not a conclusion in the ordinary sense. It is an arrival. The place this entire conversation has been moving toward, not through the accumulation of ideas, but through the gradual, often painful process of being truly seen. His overthinking was never the problem. It was the messenger. A fiercely devoted, deeply exhausted part of him that took on an impossible task: to protect him from every form of pain, loss, rejection, and uncertainty that life might bring. It worked through the only means it had available. It thought, endlessly, vigilantly, creatively, catastrophically. It built elaborate mental structures to house his fears. It rehearsed futures that never came. It replayed pasts that could not be changed. It did all of this not because it wanted to torment him. It did it because, once upon a time, when he was younger and more vulnerable and did not yet have the resources he has now, that vigilance was the closest thing to safety he could create for himself. That part of him deserves recognition, not pathologizing, not medication, not suppression, not another strategy to override it. Recognition, gratitude even, because it survived. Through environments it did not choose, through pain it did not deserve, through years of doing its best with what it had, it survived. And it helped him survive. That is not nothing. That is, in its way, remarkable. But the survival strategy has outlived the original threat. The child who needed to stay alert is now an adult who has options, resources, relationships, and an expanding capacity for self-understanding that the child never had access to. The messenger has been running for years with a warning that was urgent once and is now, if he is willing to receive it this way, simply a letter from the past. A letter written by a frightened and devoted part of him who deserved more support than he ever received. The letter has been read. Every word of it. The message has been heard. And now for the first time he is allowed to put it down. This does not mean the thoughts will stop overnight. It does not mean the patterns will dissolve in an afternoon or a week or even a season. Healing is not an event. It is a direction. It is the slow, non-linear, deeply personal process of choosing, again and again, to see himself with clarity rather than contempt. To feel what arises, rather than manage it away. To trust incrementally that his inner world does not require the level of maintenance he has believed it does for as long as he can remember. What he is not a man with a broken mind. He is a man with a deeply sensitive, deeply intelligent, deeply loyal inner system that was shaped by experiences he did not choose, and that can now, with understanding and patience, and the kind of radical self-compassion that is not weakness, but the hardest form of courage, be reshaped by the experiences he does choose. That reshaping has already begun. It began the moment he was willing to listen. He is not his loops. He is not his anxiety. He is not the worst version of his thoughts at 2 a.m. when the world is quiet and the mind is not. He is the awareness that watches all of it. He is the part that kept asking even when it was exhausted. The part that kept searching even when the path was unclear and the destination was uncertain. The part that right now in this moment is still here. That part was never broken. It was waiting. Waiting to be understood. Waiting to be told the truth. Waiting for exactly what has just happened. The message has been received. And now at last he is free to begin.